The beginning of the nightmare. The cabin was exactly as I imagined, isolated, silent, and shrouded in an atmosphere of mystery. I was seeking inspiration and tranquility for my new photography project, and that rustic structure, nestled in the mountains, seemed like the perfect retreat. But from the moment I crossed the door, I felt something was off. The first night was unsettling. The absolute silence of the surrounding forest was interrupted only by the creaks of the cabin. I thought it was just the old wooden floor, but there was an almost conscious quality to the sounds, as if someone or something was moving stealthily, lurking. In the early hours of the morning, I was awakened by a more distinct sound, light but deliberate footsteps coming from downstairs. My heart raced. I got up slowly, each movement careful not to make noise. As I descended the stairs, the flashlight trembling in my hand, I realized the footsteps had abruptly stopped. I searched every corner of the room but found nothing out of place. I decided it was just my imagination playing tricks. But upon returning to the bedroom, I felt a shiver down my spine, as if I was being watched. The next day, while exploring the cabin, I found something curious: an old diary hidden under a loose floorboard. The pages were yellowed and fragile, filled with notes from the hermit who had lived there decades ago. As I read, a growing chill took over me. The hermit described encounters with shadows moving in the forest and whispers coming from the walls. He believed he was being pursued by ancient spirits guarding that place. On the second night, the whispers began. At first, they were indistinguishable, a low murmur that could be mistaken for the wind passing through the cracks. But as the hours passed, they intensified, forming words I couldn't fully understand. My room, once a refuge of peace, became a prison of growing terror. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt a presence in the darkness, something cold and hostile. Desperate to understand what was happening, I set up cameras in various rooms of the cabin. I wanted to capture any paranormal activity. But when I reviewed the footage the next day, the devices had mysteriously failed. The images were distorted, full of static, and shadowy figures seemed to dance at the edge of the screen. The tension increased every night. The shadows, previously only visible out of the corner of my eye, began to move more clearly, as if gaining the courage to come closer. Every noise, every whisper, every movement of the shadows seemed like a prelude to something terrible lurking. One night, as I tried to sleep, I felt an intense cold sweep over my body. I opened my eyes and saw, in the darkness of the room, a denser, almost solid shadow hovering near the bed. Fear paralyzed me. The air was heavy, and the whispers became muffled screams. I was immersed in a nightmare from which I couldn't wake up. That cabin, which promised peace and inspiration, turned into a den of terror. And each night, the entities came closer, as if feeding on my fear, waiting for the right moment to fully reveal themselves. Macabre revelations. After several sleepless nights, I decided to seek answers. The hermit's diary offered me clues, but each page read left my mind more disturbed. He mentioned that the entities were ancient spirits, guardians of the forest who manifested as shadows to protect their territory. The hermit's words haunted me. Those who dare disturb their rest face a fury that transcends time. Determined to understand more, I headed to the nearest village. The locals were friendly, but at the mention of the cabin, their faces closed in expressions of fear and discomfort. I insisted, and finally, an old resident agreed to speak with me. In his small house, surrounded by memories of past times, he told me a story that chilled my blood. These entities, he said with a grave look, are not simple ghosts. They are souls trapped by their own anger and pain. When the hermit built the cabin, he disturbed their ancient graves, awakening them. He tried to appease them with rituals, but never succeeded. The shadows took everyone who tried to occupy that place since then. The old man handed me an ancient book, full of local legends and protection rituals. He warned me, these spirits are cunning. They will use your fear against you. But maybe, just maybe, this book can help you. I returned to the cabin with a mixed feeling of hope and dread. The paranormal activities in the cabin intensified. The whispers were now agonized screams. The shadows became almost tangible figures, lurking in corners and mirrors. One night, I found scratch marks on the walls and strange symbols painted with a dry, dark liquid. The entities were becoming more audacious. In one corner of the cabin, I discovered a small secret compartment. Inside, there were personal items. Old toys, love letters, belongings of the disappeared. Among them, I found a letter from the hermit, written with trembling hands. They are hunting me. Each night, they get closer. If anyone finds this, know that the key to surviving is understanding their suffering. Appeasing them requires a sacrifice. Desperate, I decided to perform one of the rituals from the ancient book. I prepared everything according to the instructions. Black candles, salt around a circle, and the recitation of a prayer in a language that seemed to tear my throat as I pronounced it. But as soon as I began, the shadows reacted violently. The candles went out, the air became cold, and I was thrown against the wall by an invisible force. The shadows materialized into horrific forms, their eyes shining with ancestral hatred. During the confrontation, I had visions of the hermit being dragged into the darkness. He screamed for help, but his words were lost in the void. The shadows fed on his fear, just as they were doing to me. Every second that passed, the sense of despair increased, and I felt the end was near. The cabin, once a refuge, became a trap. I was surrounded, the shadows slowly approaching, savoring my terror. At the height of my despair, I remembered the old man's words. They will use your fear against you. I took a deep breath, focusing on something other than fear. I thought of the things I loved, the people I cared about, and for a brief moment, I felt a spark of courage. But the battle was far from over. The entities would not be defeated so easily. I understood that to survive, I had to fully unravel the secrets of the ritual and the true reason why those souls were trapped. I knew the worst was yet to come, but I was determined to fight to the end. And then, amidst the chaos, an unexpected discovery gave me new hope. An almost illegible note in the diary revealed a crucial detail about the liberation ritual, something that could change everything. With the shadows closing in, I clung to this last hope, ready to face whatever came next, the final battle. The note in the hermit's diary was my last hope. To seal the entities, a personal sacrifice is necessary, said the almost faded line. I knew the fight was far from over, and the price to survive would be high. But now, at least, I had a plan. I spent the next day preparing the ritual. I needed specific items: a black candle, salt, dried herbs, and a personal object of great sentimental value. I chose a photo of my family, the only memory I always carried with me. The weight of the sacrifice hit me, but I knew I had no choice. As night fell, the cabin seemed to pulse with an evil energy. The shadows began to appear, denser and more threatening than ever. They knew what I was about to do. Trembling, I placed the candle in the center of the salt circle and lit it. The air turned icy and the silence was crushing. I began to recite the prayer from the ancient book, each word an effort to maintain concentration. The entities reacted violently. The walls shook, objects flew through the air, and a cacophony of screams filled the space. The shadows materialized into horrific forms, eyes shining with ancestral hatred. But I couldn't stop. I continued to recite, my voice defying the terror I felt. At the height of the ritual, I raised the photo of my family and placed it in the center of the circle. A sharp pain pierced my heart, but I knew it was necessary. The ground beneath me began to vibrate, and the shadows advanced, trying to knock me down. I fought against the invisible force, keeping my eyes fixed on the candle flame. And then, something changed. The shadows hesitated, as if a greater force was holding them back. The entire cabin seemed to take a deep breath, and the shadows began to be sucked into the center of the circle, where the candle burned intensely. The air became charged, and a final, agonized scream echoed through the cabin. When the last shadow disappeared, I fell to my knees, exhausted. The candle went out, and a heavy silence filled the space. The ritual had worked. The entities had been sealed back into their domain. But the price I paid still echoed within me, a deep pain for the loss of the only physical memory of my family. I left the cabin at dawn, leaving behind that cursed refuge.